with someone who has ADHD, one thing I'd say is working on radical acceptance for yourself, I think is one of the most empowering things with ADHD of just like really embracing and acknowledging like this is my brain just works differently.
Mm-hmm.
And when we can
It's
accept,
not worse.
yeah,
It's
it's
not
not
broken.
worse. Yeah, it's not, there's nothing, it works different than other people. So being able to accept it and then work with it, and find your areas of strength or what things are really help you succeed and grow in life. And you can achieve so much that way.
Hi, guys, and welcome back to the Thick Thighs Save Lives podcast. I'm Kelsey, and today I am joined with Becca King, who is a registered dietitian from North Carolina. And she is an adult with ADHD who struggled for years with disordered eating. Becca is passionate about helping others who have ADHD and struggle with binge eating, chronic dieting, oh my God, and body image issues. So, welcome, Becca. We're so glad to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm personally really excited about this topic because I have ADHD.
Yeah.
So it's a personal one for me. And I feel like there's been so much stigma over the years about talking about ADHD and then getting specifically into just like how that affects eating.
Yeah. I think there used to be, like we were talking about this before we started, of like there used to be so much stigma with like mentioning it or talking about it. Like I remember when I was in school to like be a dietitian, I remember in grad school, like it was like something I felt I had to like be secretive about or like like not talk about with others. And now I feel like over the course of the pandemic, I think just normalizing a lot more mental health conversations has just normalize being able to talk about it and not be like this weird thing.
Yeah, I mean, and just for so many people who kind of are sitting back and still have felt some stigma around it, like people like you putting it out there and being like, hey, so I have ADHD, I've struggled with these things, and I have some tools to help you. I think
Yes.
that is just so much more reassurance where you're like, number one, I'm not alone. And number two, there are tools.
Yes. Yeah. And I think there's so much of the advice, like even with eating, that is very focused for neurotypical people or people who don't have ADHD. And so then it doesn't work. And there's so much shame that comes with that on top of all the other all the shame that a lot of ADHDers feel from other areas of their life of like, you're just lazy, you don't try hard enough, all of the messages people get. And so adding that with food just adds a whole nother layer and just kind of normalizing some behaviors with things for people of like, hey, I don't have to cook every single meal from scratch or whatever, of making things like working with where you're at and working with your brain and making things work. It's just makes life so much easier.
Oh my God, I love that so much because like we don't talk about how that we already have so much shame around food. We have
Yes.
so much shame around, anyone who's neurodivergent, and then we put them together and it's like, wow, it's the perfect storm. Like
Yes.
I literally remember being in school and then like I was allowed like some extra like time on tests or to be able to take them in another room. And I was always like, no, I'll just take them here. But like, and I would try and like rush through it so that no one would know. And it was like, you have these other tools that you're even just like ashamed to use. And I'm so excited to talk to you about it with food because number one, it's a choice we have to make every day.
Yeah.
And it affects the rest of our functioning.
Yes. Yeah. It's like, and it's multiple times a day. Like, it's not just like, oh, I only have to eat one time a day and it's done. I don't have to think about it. Like, I have to eat several times a day. It takes a lot of executive function to be able to plan and prepare and have things so you can nourish your body. And if you're not nourishing your body, all of your ADHD symptoms are going to be worse oftentimes.
Yes. It's a snowball effect.
Yeah.
It's all going to get worse from this one decision.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about how you got started, focusing on ADHD and nutrition?
Yeah. Oh, I actually worked in weight loss before my first job, and it was not the place for me. It was not really aligned with my values in terms of nutrition. But I was like, I could get some counseling experience, and like I can sneak in some like anti-diet stuff here. I totally thought I could as a first year dietitian. No, could not. And it was actually horrible. They wanted me to see someone for that was bulimic for weight loss, and I was like, that was kind of my final straw. I was like, this is so wrong. And then it was right as the pandemic was starting, so when they passed the unemployment stuff, I was like, hey, can I like get laid off? And they were like, yeah.
Can
And I
I
was like,
get laid off?
awesome. Like, and then I got a business coach and started working with her, and I knew I wanted to work in like the intuitive eating, like non-diet space, but I didn't really know where I fit in. And as I was kind of working with a really good friend and thinking about my own story with my relationship with food, I was like, there's this whole ADHD component of like not eating. Specifically for us, it was like not eating on our meds and then binging at night when they would wear off. And I was like, there's this whole thing no one's talking about. And so I like did some market research in some Facebook support groups, and like all of these women were talking about how they struggled with binge eating or had all of these issues related to food, and there was nobody talking about it on social media or really anywhere. And all the stuff I saw was always for kids with ADHD. And I'm like, okay, well, all these kids become adults, or you get diagnosed. For women, a lot of times you don't get diagnosed till you're an adult, and so you'll have all of these issues with food that you're struggling with and you don't know what to do about it. And I was like, I'm going to start talking about this. And I remember my business coach being a little apprehensive because she just imagined like the little hyperactive boy and was like, okay, like you can try it. And I was like, no, I really think I do. And I think a lot of the reason it took off was a lot of stuff that was just, I was talking about was like really practical things or things people had never really connected. Like, oh, my challenges with food are actually related to ADHD, because a lot of our challenges in life, like it's not just being able to do your schoolwork and focus or do your work or whatever. It's all aspects of your life that get impacted by ADHD. And so I think being able to make that connection with food for people is like this aha moment. And they're like, okay, now I can actually start to work on things and have a lens to work through, because I can account for where I'm struggling and understand those struggles a little bit better.
Oh, yeah, I love that. I love just like bridging that gap and making that connection, because like we think about the things that are more task oriented, like
Yep.
school and work, and not how your ADHD is like affecting the way that you do everything
Everything.
throughout
Yeah.
your day.
Yep.
And like
Yeah.
the just like level of difficulty it makes it, but the fact that we can put some different tools in there if you try to work with yourself instead of trying to work against
Yeah.
yourself. I think that was the thing I struggled with for so many years, where I was like, well, I'll just figure out a way to do it like everyone else. And I was
Yeah.
like, that is never going to work. Like, I'm in my
Yeah.
30s. It still hasn't worked. And as soon as I kind of like went into an acceptance period of like, this is how my mind works, or this is how I think
Yeah.
about things, like it was just like a big sigh of relief.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. I think I got really fortunate when I was in school that like I I wasn't diagnosed till I was 19. So I think all through high school it was like a game for me to figure out how to study and do things. And so that was the only reason I did okay with things like academically. And my mom kept me busy, so I didn't really notice my ADHD until I got to college. And I was like, I don't know how to like do all of the things and I
Mhm.
can't figure it out. And I was super overwhelmed. And my roommate at the time, she had ADHD and was like, we're two peas in a pod. Like, and I was like, I need to talk to my therapist about this.
Yes. Oh, I love that. And like the people who start with some life experience, and then it leads them down a path through like, okay, you started with, some nutrition stuff, but you were like, I'm
Yeah.
not really aligned here. And
Yep.
then put your personal experience, like that just ends up being the best combination of like passion and knowledge to
Yes.
like share with the world. So I'm just
Yeah.
thankful you did that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it like for women, there isn't as much, there's starting to be more information about how ADHD presents in women. So I think
Mm.
it's so important to work with clinicians who really understand ADHD. And that usually means like they probably have ADHD, and so they can understand what it's like to have like be in your brain and be able to
Mm.
offer you things that work versus like I have so many clients be like, I worked with a dietitian and they gave me this recipe that had like 20 different ingredients. It took an hour to make, and they're like, and then I never made it, and then I came back and they asked me why, and like I couldn't explain to them why. And I was like, yeah, I understand, because I try not to pick those recipes because I know that that's way too overwhelming for my brain.
And like, well, and then there's like a whole shame, like, why didn't you make it? And it's like, well, I wanted to, but the whole thing was so overwhelming that I
I don't
just
know where to
stared
start.
at it.
Yeah. I don't know where to start. I don't have all those ingredients. So now I have to go to the store. I have to figure out where all of those ingredients are. I have to learn how to make a new recipe. And usually whatever the time is on a recipe is going to be at least, 1.5 to 2 times or maybe more longer
You're gonna
than what it
multiply
is.
that.
Yeah. So,
Oh man, I love it. What are so when you start working with some of your clients, what are some of the
yeah.
first questions that you ask them?
Yeah, so I think really digging into like what their relationship with food is kind of one of the first questions that I ask, as well as like what's your biggest challenge or what are you struggling with, and kind of using that to kind of navigate the conversation. Oftentimes, most of my clients struggle with binge eating or overeating in some way, shape, or form. So for me, it's kind of digging deeper to just figure out where or why that's happening, and
Mm.
that can be for a variety of reasons, but that way kind of being able to start creating or identifying areas that we can focus on to address usually the binge eating or the overeating.
Yeah, so like where is your main where's the main struggle? Like is it binge
Yeah.
eating? Is it overeating? Is it just like eating at the end of the day? And
Yeah.
then I know, you talk about the how meds play into that
Yeah.
and how that can really change for some people who are on medication.
Yeah. Yeah. I think medication can be a great tool. So I have a lot of women tend to get diagnosed later in life. So oftentimes with those clients, they've maybe been using food as a way to self-medicate or get dopamine basically. So
Mm.
ADHD brains are lower, just tend to have lower levels of dopamine. So we're constantly seeking out ways to get dopamine. And food is just a pretty like carbs and sweets and crunchy foods are pretty accessible, for most people, and they don't require a lot of effort to get. So those are foods that people will rely on. And like, I don't understand. I was always constantly snacking, but I wasn't hungry. I was like, I'm just a boredom eater. I don't understand what was wrong. And then they'll get medicated and they're like, all of my cravings for food and my desire to eat, like, yes, it's an appetite suppressant, but it's also giving their brain the dopamine that it's looking for. So they don't need to constantly seek it from food anymore. But medication can also have the side effect of suppressing your appetite too much. So then I call it the ADHD binge restrict cycle, where you don't eat enough during the day or your eating patterns are really inconsistent. And then when in the evening, when your medication wears off, you're ravenous. I call it the hunger monster that comes out. And you're like, I
Mhm.
need all of the food at this point. So it's like, and you're so hungry at that point, it's hard to eat mindfully and, stay in tune with your hunger and fullness. And it's not that it's really just your biology trying to make up for what, you know, it's trying to protect you. It's like, hey, if all you ate was like, you know, a protein bar this morning and it's 6 o'clock at night, like you need some food. You need to feed me, buddy. Like
Yeah.
I need food. So
Now, all of it.
yes. So, and for me, that Vyvanse, I guess, would be one of the medications. It is prescribed for binge eating. Um, or it can be prescribed for binge eating, but I think the important part with it is also actually addressing the binge eating, because like the medication's great while you're on it, but you can't take it, it's a stimulant, so you can't be in your system 24/7. So like if you don't get to the root of why you're binge eating, then for a lot of my clients it's like, okay, I might not binge eat during the day anymore, which is great, but in the evening I'm still binge eating if they're not getting support with like what's actually going on there, because usually it's not necessarily usually the food that's the issue when someone's binge eating or overeating. There's usually some other
Mm.
unmet need, or even when it comes to food, of just not having enough of it and needing to make up for that. So
What a sigh of relief some of that is, though, because I think a
yes.
lot of women, when they have all of these cravings and they don't know why, they kind of go into this blame cycle with
Yeah.
themselves
Oh
of
yeah.
like, I am just like, my willpower is just not
Mm-hmm.
there. And like, why can't I control my cravings, or like other people can? You start comparing
Yeah.
yourself. But like, what a sigh of relief it is sometimes to just hear, like, like your brain has some lower dopamine. You're
Yes.
looking to meet that need. And how
Yes.
you're looking to meet that need is completely normal. And
Yes.
like, it's not a willpower thing. You're just
Yep.
looking for that dopamine fix,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. And And I even try to tell people, like, 'cause some people are like, well, then how do I stop eating for
Yeah.
stimulation? And it's just the same thing with like emotional eating. I kind of put it in the same area as emotional eating because it
Mhm.
often feels like boredom eating for a lot of my clients. And so for me, it's just like when you are emotionally eating, instead of saying don't ever emotionally eat, like give yourself permission to do that and do it mindfully, so you can for when it comes to stimulation, maximize that dopamine by like really honing in on the taste and the texture and all the yummy stuff that, gives you that stimulation. And then oftentimes you don't end up eating as much of it as you might have done in the past when instead of like, okay, I'm watching TV, I'm just going to be mindlessly eating this bag of potato chips because the TV is not stimulating enough and I need something to do. And then the
Mhm.
whole bag of potato chips is gone. And I'm like, okay, how about we sit and mindfully eat them? And then you can go watch TV, or you can, for me, I keep fidgets around because I could eat a bag of pretzels in front of my TV very easily. But I just realized I'm like, I'm not hungry. My hands just needs like my hands and mouth need something to do. And so
Mhm.
putting a fidget or something in front of me makes it, keeps my hands occupied. And it's not necessarily that I'm doing it in a restrictive way. It's just like I know that this is another one of my tools in my toolkit when I need some
Yes.
stimulation. So it's like keeping food as a part of that toolkit, but just trying to add other tools, like movement, music, all sorts of things that you can add
Yes.
to that toolkit so that food just isn't the only thing that we rely
Yes. Oh my God, I love that so much.
on.
So how does like nutrition look different for those of us with ADHD? And like what's some of your advice?
So I think part of it is being realistic with what works for you. Because I think, again, a lot of the advice people get is like, maybe it's spend your whole Sunday meal prepping, which for a lot of my clients, they're like, I'm never doing that.
Never.
Like they like, I don't like, I enjoy cooking. And personally, the idea of spending hours in my kitchen on a Sunday, I've never been able to wrap my head around. And my preferences as an ADHD are like, my preferences change with food. And so if I plan I'm making this meal and it's gonna be my lunch all week. By like Tuesday or Wednesday, there's a good chance I don't want that anymore. And then I'm wasting food. So I think it's being realistic and just normalizing, like, hey, if you need what I call shortcuts to make simplifying the cooking process, like, hey, buy a salad kit, buy a rotisserie chicken if that makes things easier for you, or like individual size things so you don't have to portion everything out. Like, yes,
Mhm.
it might require using a little bit more plastic and things like that, but it might make it easier for you to actually nourish yourself because for a lot of my clients, once they get going during the day, stopping and eating just feels like an inconvenience. And
Mhm.
then that's kind of where you end up not getting eat. Even if you're not medicated, it's just like I don't want to stop and eat because I have so many other things to do. Why would I do that? Or if I'm hyper
Highly
focused,
inconvenient.
yeah, like if or it feels like you're wasting your time because
Mhm.
it's not checking off a task in your brain. Um, so for me, it's trying to figure out how to eat every 3 to 4 hours to keep your blood sugar stable. Whatever that at first for my clients, I'm like, I don't care what you're eating, just eat something every 3 to 4 hours, and we can start tweaking the nutrition side of things, you know, along the way. But doing that, and then that starts to show them how much better their brains and their bodies work when their blood sugar is not like on this roller coaster of going like, oh, I eat breakfast and then I don't eat till 2 or 3 o'clock, and it's like, yeah, your body's working really hard because your blood sugar dropped, and now it's trying to make up for that, and your executive function probably out the window by the time you eat. So that piece, and then honestly, when it comes to like the actual nutrition, it really is just following like the general guidelines for healthy eating. But a lot of times it's that executive function piece that comes in that makes it hard to do that. So it's like, how do I get fruits and vegetables in if my fruits and vegetables always go bad in my fridge when I buy them? Or, cooking proteins, getting in enough fiber, things like that can be hard, especially if you don't have a plan and then all of a sudden you're ravenous. It's very easy to be like, okay, I'm just going to order food again, or I'm just going to stop and grab fast food or some sort of really packaged thing. And not that those foods are bad, but if you're relying on them, all the time, you might be missing out on some more, whole foods that are going to provide you a lot more, nutrition.
Mhm. I think that sometimes in the health and fitness space, we try and talk about like prepping a lot and like a
Yeah.
Sunday prep. And for years, I really, really struggled with that because I was like, I am committed to eating healthy, nutritious food throughout the week, I know it's going to help my training, and
Yeah.
I know that like I feel better. And I was, really working with the like, okay, I know I feel better when I'm eating, that this amount of time. But
Yeah.
on Sunday, I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to want to eat on Tuesday. And the fact is that if I make something that on Tuesday I don't want to eat, I'm not eating at all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it was like a big drop off, right? So like I'll like plan this whole thing and it'll be all in my fridge, and then I'm like, oh, who was
Yeah.
that person? I don't even like that anymore.
Yeah.
And it's like such a stark difference to like, did I ever like that? But I
Yes.
think that's just like an additional challenge with people that like, I'm so
Yeah.
glad you brought up that like, well, it changes and you
Yeah.
can't
And
predict it.
that was the hard part for me, like with intuitive eating, is it's like honor, eat what you want, like honor your cravings. And when I started my intuitive eating journey, I was like, how the hell, excuse my language if I hope that's okay. But I was
No,
like, how
go
the
for
hell
it.
do I do this? I was like, how do I plan what I want to eat when I never know what I want to eat? I was like, I don't understand. I was like, I don't understand. Like, how do you plan, but also honor your cravings? I was like, this is complicated. And like,
Mm.
I've figured it out over the years a little bit better now. So
Yeah. Oh, you definitely have. And I can't wait to get into some more of those like tips. I did want to
yeah.
ask you, what do you think some of the standout misconceptions are with ADHD?
Oh, yeah. I would say laziness is a big one, that people are just lazy or they don't care. Like, um, if someone tells that, like you should be doing some, even if it comes like to, working out. I have some clients. For me, my brain is not happy if I'm not moving my body. So like
Mm.
it is easy for me to get myself motivated to do that. That is just, and it's something I've done my whole life. But for some of my other clients, it's like they know they need to move, but the task initiation, which,
Mm.
they struggle with task initiation, or I don't know what I want to do or where to get started or if it's the right thing, just all of that thinking. And so then people be like, oh, you just don't care. Or like, you're
Mm.
just lazy. And they're like, no, I'm frozen on the couch trying to get myself up to go get dressed and go to the gym and I can't do it. And
And
like,
what movements and what programming, and there's so,
yeah.
like the knowledge out there can become overwhelming very quickly.
Oh yeah, because there's just so much out there. But even with food, it's like, okay, if I have to decide what to eat, I don't know. What is this? Is this the right thing? Is this the wrong thing? And then if you go to one place, it's okay. If you go somewhere else, that's bad. You shouldn't have that. And so it's so confusing. So I think that's probably one of the like biggest misconceptions um, that I see a lot, is that people just don't care, that they're lazy, and that's usually not the case. Or for women, I think getting like, oh, you can't have ADHD. That's another one that comes up. I don't know
Mm.
necessarily misconception of, but like for some women, you're just so good at masking or hiding your symptoms so you appear normal that when you tell someone you have ADHD, they're like, no, how could you have ADHD? And and
Mm.
then you're like, you don't know how hard I try to look like this, or to keep my house this clean, or
Yep.
get all my work done on time, all
Mhm.
of this stuff. Then they're like, no, you couldn't. Or everyone has a little bit of ADHD. That would be another big one too, of like,
Mm.
that one I hear a lot with when I tell people what I do. Sometimes they're like, oh yeah, but everyone has a little bit of ADHD. And I was like, no, 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 if you have ADHD, there's no light switch here. Like, yes,
No.
you might struggle with paying attention sometimes, or you might be a little hyperactive every once in a while. But I was like, but it doesn't, I don't get to pick and choose when those things happen. It's a constant thing. Like, there is no light switch. Some days might be better than others, but like it's all the time.
Yeah, I think that's one of the that's funny you said that. I think that's one of the things I hear a lot too, is like when someone has like, it's usually when someone has a lot of energy like
Yeah.
in a day, they're like, "Oh, this like I guess I just have ADHD today." I'm like, "No, no. That's an energy spurt.
Yeah.
There's a big difference here."
You probably just got a really good night of sleep, and so
Yeah.
you're energetic today.
If I could transfer this over, you'd feel the difference.
Yeah, like, it's like, imagine just like on a day you want to relax and your body is like,
Mm-mm-mm.
like sitting on the couch feels uncomfortable. Like you should be doing something. And you're like, but I just want to just have like, can we just chill for a couple hours? And it's like, okay, if my body isn't like being hyperactive, then it's your brain for a lot of the clients I work with it's more hyperactivity in their brain. So it's like their brain's just never, it's, having a million tabs open and you're bouncing between all the tabs constantly, which is just
Mm.
exhausting. And you don't get to just be like, hey, we're just going to close down the browsers and it's going to be a good day. It like doesn't get to work like
Doesn't work like that.
that.
I think that the other thing too is that the hyper focus, people don't it's hard to understand hyper focus because you're like,
Yeah.
well, you are really focused on this thing, and you're like, you don't understand how that feels more of like an obsession that
Yeah.
cannot be broken.
Yeah.
And that's part of ADHD.
Yeah. Yeah. And that it's not, we don't always get to choose what our brains want to hyper focus
Mm,
on or focus on just in general. Like, I think people think it's a lack of focus, and it's not that it's necessarily that you can't focus, it's that your brain wants to focus on maybe what it shouldn't be doing in that moment. And even with ADHD medication, like it helps give you stimulation so you can focus, but your brain, that doesn't tell your brain like, hey, we're working
which
right now,
one?
so we need to
Yeah.
do this. It's like I was talking with my really good friend last night, and she's like, I have to like, how do I channel my work tasks are boring. Then I have these thought bubbles that come up of like, where should I go for vacation? And like I can't get it out of my head until I do something about it.
Yeah.
But I need to get this task done. And we were like talking about how to like brain dump things so she could continue focusing on her work, because it's like you don't get to choose sometimes, and it's frustrating. It's
Yeah.
frustrating.
And you're like, shh, quiet that thought.
Yeah.
We're trying to do this other thing, but it's so loud. I know you talked about eating for stimulation a little bit,
Yeah.
but can you talk about what this kind of looks like, and if eating for
Yeah.
stimulation is okay, and
Yeah.
what are some of the tips that you have for those of us who eat with or are looking for that stimulation?
Yeah. So I think there's a couple ways that you can show up. Like the TV example, where like TV often is not very stimulating for ADHD brains. So like you probably are on your phone and watching TV. Like most people who have ADHD are probably not just sitting and watching a show unless you are like, this is my favorite show ever and I'm super into it kind of thing. Um, and so with food, it can be just kind of like that mindless eating in front of the TV, or like while you're studying. That's a great example too. If I have clients who'd be like, get diagnosed after they got through college and they're like,
Mm,
that's why I needed that crunchy snack in the library while I was studying so I could focus.
mhm,
So that's kind of one way that it'll show up. For some of my clients, it'll be just like a reward kind of thing. Um, or like a way to procrastinate, even could get enough stimulation to get started with a task. But
mhm,
in terms of what foods give you stimulation, it's going to be anything that provides a good sensory experience. So
mhm,
crunchy foods for a lot of my clients are very stimulating. Carbs in particular are a source of dopamine. So carbs and sweets tend to be a preference too, and that can kind of help my clients too. And they're like, now I can also understand why I really like carbs, which there's nothing wrong with liking carbs, but it's just
mhm.
knowing that like, hey, my brain
Yeah.
prefers that. And there is some interesting research too to show that like ADHD brains are slower to metabolize glucose. So by the time you've had enough carbohydrates, your brain hasn't caught up yet. So
Mm,
you end up overeating carbs
mhm,
as a response. And so I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. You
mhm,
know, I don't demonize eating for stimulation. I just try to have my clients make it as mindful of an experience as possible so that they can kind of maximize that sensory experience ideally. And then you're kind of going to get more dopamine ideally, maybe for like a smaller quantity of food and not end up like overeating or binging. Um, and then again, just making sure it's not your only tool. Like for my clients, it's like checking in of like, hey, I need stimulation. What right now feels good for me? Like, what can I do? And maybe it's food, maybe it's going for a walk, maybe it's playing with your dog or whatever, but just having options and asking what feels right in the moment. And it's not always going to end up being food for a lot of people. So,
Yeah, that's a great tip in even just noticing that it is stimulation that you're looking for.
yeah,
It's not necessarily the food. Sometimes it is.
yeah,
But like there's no one answer for
yeah,
the whole thing. Like sometimes you
yeah.
might just be looking for stimulation.
Yeah,
So
it's
I
like
love
if
that like
you're bored, like for my clients to say, like if you feel like you need something to do with your hands or your mouth, as strange
mm,
as that might sound, if it's that sensation or I'm just bored, like you're walking to the fridge and just opening it, like looking in the fridge, like I'm not hungry, but I'm here. I don't know why I'm bored. I need something to do. And just being more aware of that and being like, oh, it's not that I'm just want to eat because I don't have that self-control or willpower. It's like, oh no, I'm bored. And that's why, like,
Mm.
and just being able to recognize that.
Yeah. And it's so funny because I was literally thinking about like yesterday. I was just like kind of wandering around. I was supposed to be watching a show with my boyfriend, but like I was just kind of like wandering around the living room, and I walked into the like kitchen, like opened up the fridge, and then I was like, why am I here? And then just kind of like looked around, and he's like, no one knows what you're doing right now. Cause I was just kind of like, I was doing more of a like wandering like
Yeah.
around. And then I'm like in the fridge, but I was not hungry for sure. Like we ate
Yeah.
a little while ago, but I was just looking for something. What can
Yeah.
I do around here?
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of us, like sometimes like you just almost like catch yourself like, I am in the fridge right now, huh? Like
Yeah. 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 And then it's like you have that, if you catch yourself, I try to tell my clients, like, if you catch yourself, you have the permission to stop and pause and
Mhm.
ask yourself, am I hungry? Yes, eat something. Am I not hungry? No, I'm not. Am I just looking for stimulation or something to do? Yeah, I think so. Okay, well, would eating serve me in this moment? Yes or no? And if it does, awesome. If it doesn't, then there's other things that you can, do in that
Mhm.
moment.
Yeah, because you have permission to realize it's just stimulation you're looking for.
Yeah.
There's your permission.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about how medication affects ADHD.
Yeah.
And I was hoping you could dive into this a little bit more because I think a lot of people, um, you know, we kind of go in one direction or the other with some thoughts where you're like, either, with medication, I'm supposed to be, my appetite's supposed to be suppressed. So like,
Yeah.
why am I not losing weight? Or feeling the
Yeah.
other way, like you're just, you're eating at the end of the day. Like, how does that affect,
Yeah. Yeah.
eating?
And I think I would say that's another misconception is that, like, oh, because I'm on an appetite suppressant, I should lose weight. And it's like that
Mm,
might not happen, or it might not even suppress your appetite. Like, I have clients that eat perfectly, like, fine. Like, I take Adderall, and for the most, like, I can still eat. I like, don't have huge issues with appetite on my meds. And so I think it is often a misconception, or it becomes misused. Like, stimulants are not supposed to be for weight loss.
mhm,
I'm sure some doctors use Vyvanse, the one for binge eating, in hopes that their patients will lose weight, but that's not always the result that often I don't see very often with my clients. And so
mhm,
I think there's a lot of frustration or shame too that comes with that, because it's like, oh, I'm on this medication and it's not helping me lose weight, even though it's supposed to be suppressing my appetite. And it's like, no, it's supposed to be giving your brain dopamine so that you can function properly. And like,
mhm,
if you lose weight on it, okay. And if you lose too much weight, like, your doctor is probably going to adjust your dosage. So, it's something to be mindful of, because that's one big thing. That's why you have to, part of the reason you have to see a doctor if you are on one every like 3 months to get your medication, is to monitor those sorts of things, because it is a highly controlled substance. So it's like, something you have to be cautious of.
mhm.
But yeah, I think it always is like, people will be like, yeah, this is going to help lose weight. And then if it doesn't, they're like, what the heck? And I'm like, no, it's okay. Like, it's helping you. How much has your life improved since you started taking the medication? And
Yeah.
oftentimes, even if their body size hasn't changed, their life has probably gotten a lot better in a lot of areas.
Hmm. Yeah, it's that, I mean, that's the societal pressure too, to
Yeah.
like, have this affect my weight in a positive or negative way, and just that
Yep.
expectation on that. Or the other side, like not even knowing that, medication could affect your appetite
Yeah.
and could affect timing of eating.
Yep.
So can you talk a little bit about just like the timing of eating, maybe if you're having difficulty with a suppressed appetite during the
Yeah.
day and then finding yourself binge eating at night?
Yeah. So I explore this a lot with my clients. Kind of say, like, the general, the typical eating pattern, right, is like 3 meals, a mid-morning snack, mid-afternoon snack kind of thing. I'm like, that's the general pattern. I was like, but that might not work for you, and that's okay. Like, it's there as a tool, and if it doesn't work, we can play around with it and see what works. So some of my clients will do a larger breakfast and dinner, kind of anchor their meals,
Mm.
and then maybe graze or have like more midi meals throughout the day if that's easier for them to eat. Because for some people, it's like eating seeing a large volume of food completely turns them off from eating on their medication. Like, I can't even finish. I can take 2 bites of my sandwich and I can't even finish it. So it's like, okay, what can we do? Or maybe it's incorporating more liquids like protein shakes or smoothies or soups or things like that you can kind of, most people are like, oh, you shouldn't drink your calories. I'm like, no, that actually can be very helpful for folks who are on a medication that chewing food is really unappealing or nauseating for them. Like, getting in actual nutrition that way might be a really good tool for them. So those are some things, or figuring out foods you can tolerate on your medication, which might be sometimes more like kid-like foods, or that I call them, because like some people are like, oh, I can have a PB&J, or or I can do like mac and cheese or whatever, or like those little fruit pouches and things like that. If they might be quote unquote kids foods, but if you can eat them, that's better than not. Something is better than nothing, and getting adjusted to it. If it's so hard for you to eat during the day, it's always something to talk to your doctor about, because there's so many medications now. It's not like, oh, sorry, that med didn't work, so you're just not going to take it. It's like, it could just be adjusting the dosage a little bit, or the type of stimulant, or maybe even exploring non-stimulants. There's so many options out there. So if it is such a challenge for you and it's really impacting, the way you function, something to explore. And I think for some of my clients, they don't mind if they might not full on binge in the evening, but they might eat a larger volume of food at night, and they're okay with that, because that's just kind of how they're eating. And if that's okay with them, then I'm not going to like force them to change it. But it's just being aware of like, hey, if I'm not eating enough during the day, for me, when I was in grad school, that was my problem, was like, I ate really well. It was just not enough. And then in the evening, I would be ravenous and binge. And so it was kind of just like my learning curve of like, hey, if you do add more during the day, you don't binge at night. And it's really nice.
Yeah. That's some great advice, honestly, for just thinking about what might work for you, and then
Yeah.
being okay with that, instead of trying to
Yes.
fit into the rules of like, well, I can't have bigger meals at the end of the day. But like, if that works for you and you find it really difficult to eat or stop during the day, and that is working for your life, like, let's roll with the things that work
Yeah.
for us
Yeah.
individually, instead of these like rules that like someone else made that does not apply to
Yeah.
you.
Oh yeah, like I eat dinner pretty late. I also stay up late, and so like I know there's a pick like, don't eat past like 6 or don't eat past 7 or 8 o'clock at night. I'm like, but if my meds don't, like if I take my meds later in the day and my meds don't wear off until around that time, like I don't really want food until then. And if I stay up till 11, 12 o'clock at night, like that's plenty of time for my body to digest that food, and I'll be okay. Like, I'm not concerned about it. And then just removing the shame and the judgment from that too, of like, this is what works for me, and that's okay. Like, I think that too, if there's shame and guilt tied to our eating, we're more likely to overeat or binge when we are feeling shame or guilt or bad about the way that we're eating.
Yes, absolutely. That those themes, really
Yeah.
shame and guilt are really affecting like
Yes.
how we are accepting in our nutrition.
Yeah.
One of the other things, like we dove into it a little bit, but can you just explain why ADHD can feel overwhelmed, or people with ADHD can feel overwhelmed with
Yeah.
cooking?
I think so. So executive dysfunction is, I guess, like is kind of my favorite way to explain ADHD, because it's like, it's from planning to organizing to implementing to completing tasks, all of that. And when you put that in cooking, I mean, there's so many steps, from deciding what to eat to going to the grocery store, remembering to get all of the ingredients, coming back, and the grocery store itself can just be overstimulating because of the lights, all the sound, all the people. For some people, it's just like exhausting. And then having to read through a recipe, follow directions, which for some people is really hard. And the time, like, to be able to stay focused, depending on how long it is that recipe is, to be able to just stay on task and not to get distracted by whatever else is
And
going
burning
on in your
down the
house.
house.
Yeah, like, kind of thing. So it's just a lot for people. And I think if you don't have if you don't find cooking rewarding, because I will have chefs who'll be like, it's not overwhelming. I'm like, well, you're a chef, so this is like this is what your brain loves to do. So yes, it's not as challenging for you to do. But for other people, if they don't have a lot of experience in the kitchen, or like they don't have a lot, it's not something they've done a lot of their life, it's overwhelming to step in there and be like, I don't know how to do any of these things. And now I have to, how do I do this? Like there's just so many steps involved. And so it's just, if you don't have a lot of experience or time even, to spend there, it just feels like a lot. So.
Yeah, that's a really great way to put it. And I'm so glad you brought up the grocery store
Yeah.
because I know that the grocery store is incredibly overwhelming for me. I never enjoyed going. And when people say
Yeah.
like, well, I like to go to the grocery store and go around, I'm like, that is a nightmare. And during the pandemic, like I found Instacart.
Yep.
And I was like, this is the greatest thing ever invented.
Yes.
Like for me, it is made just like having foods that I'll eat accessible to me without the first step of having to like do the whole grocery store situation has been like life changing.
Oh yeah. Yes. I just got, that was like at first too. And that was another area like I felt shame around. And even my clients were like, but I should be able to go to the grocery store like everyone else. And it's like, but it's such a time saver. Like I love Instacart because when you put the order in, it tells you how many hours of grocery shopping you've saved. And I can go get a workout in. I can go clean my apartment instead of having to spend the time in the car, going to the store, trying to remember everything, not impulsively buy things, and then come back and put it all away. All I have to do is wait for someone to drop it off at my door and I can put it away. And that's great. Like I love it. And it's like, no, if that works for you, use it. And it's great too. Like I find, again, the impulsive spending, like I can see my cart adding up. So like I'm not going to add a bunch of random things to my cart like I would in the grocery store. And then you get to checkout and you're like, oh, that was not what I was trying to say. Yeah. And you can't be like, hey, sorry, let me go put all these things back. But you can do that on an app and be like, yeah, we can pick a couple fun things to add to the cart, but maybe not all of these things. So I find that's helpful too. And it's just, I don't know. I love those. That's like one of those shortcut things. I'm like, if that works for you, use it. Like it makes life easier. Or you can plan ahead and order your groceries in advance. So if it's like, hey, I'm on vacation and I know I'm going to come home and we don't have any groceries, you can order groceries now and have them delivered. So you don't have to figure it out as you're getting back into your routine again or whatever. So I think, it's a great resource for people. And you can find recipes on those kind of apps now and it saves what you buy. So you can like go back and look at what you've already bought before and do it again, like, or, change it a little bit if you need to. So I'm like, it's those sorts of tools I think are so helpful. And again, it just makes it easier. And then you might actually want to explore more recipes in the kitchen or have more energy to actually cook because you didn't exhaust yourself just to go get the ingredients.
Because by the time you get back, you're like, I'm not doing anything else. That was it.
And then people feel guilty. They're like, I went and grocery shopped and then I didn't have the energy to cook, so I ordered food, or I heated up a frozen meal. And I always laugh because I'm like, dietitians do that all the time. Like my friends always do that. So I'm like, it's a normal thing to do. Like you might just want to plan, if you do actually grocery shop, plan like, hey, we're going to go pick up food from here, or we're going to buy a frozen thing to heat up or whatever that day, and just normalize it of like, maybe the grocery shopping day happens to be the day we get takeout or whatever, just of like, that's okay. It works for me versus like, I'm terrible because I bought groceries and then I didn't immediately eat them. It's like, no, you don't have to do terrible. That. That's just like a made up rule we made for ourselves.
That's a made up rule. All of these made up rules make everything so much more difficult.
Yes.
Can you also talk about why restrictive dieting is particularly harmful for people with ADHD?
Yeah. So restrictive dieting, obviously, in general, is not usually maintainable for most folks. But I think folks with ADHD are at a higher risk of eating disorders, especially binge eating and bulimia. And, typically the response to restriction is binging, or even purging. So I think it's important to know that like, hey, intentionally restricting is just, I always tell people it's like a pendulum of like restrictions on one end and binging or overeating, whatever it is, on the other. And the more you restrict, at some point that pendulum is going to swing the opposite direction and it's not going to be pretty. And when it comes to restricting too, when we restrict foods, it makes those foods more rewarding to our brain when we have them, which means you're getting more dopamine from them. And for my clients, it's really cool when we work on making peace with food. I'm like, giving themselves unconditional permission to have whatever they want, which sounds crazy at first, but like once you say you can do that, those foods stop being as appealing because oftentimes like they're not the foods that make us feel great. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, if you love ice cream, eating a pint of ice cream is not going to make you feel great. But if you say, "Hey, I can have ice cream in it whenever I want," it's not as like enticing anymore,
Mm-hmm.
because it's there. It's not scarce. Just like when you tell a little kid, "You can't, don't touch the thing." Like, "Hey, you can't touch that." All the kid wants to do is touch it. So it's the same thing for us as adults. Like, "Hey, if you
Mm-hmm.
can't have that, all you want is the thing you can't have." So then, when you do have it, you end up your brain's like, we better get all of this before it's gone. And then over time, when you start allowing it and connecting to with like how those foods feel in your body, I think is a big piece because people
Mm-hmm.
are like, when they hear unconditional permission to eat, they're like, I will eat all of the things all the time. I'm like, but with attunement. So like, how do those foods feel when you eat them? And at that quantity, and oftentimes it's like, I don't really want that. Like, it doesn't make
Mm-hmm.
me feel good to do that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
And there's a learning curve in there too, because sometimes when you take that restriction away and you kind of go into this like, okay, nothing is off limits, and sometimes you have to play with like, going too far and then realizing like, I don't actually feel good anymore, and
Yes.
maybe I'm gonna learn from that next time. But it's
Yeah.
not an immediate switch, like
Yeah.
it never is.
Yeah, it's a honeymoon phase is
Yep.
what a lot of dietitians will call it. Is like it's the honeymoon phase of like just I like one of the like mantras I tell my clients is I can always have more later just to remove that restriction mindset of getting their brain used to like that food is going to be there again in the future and like whatever later is, even if later is 15 minutes after you have something or an
Mhm.
hour or you know the next day or 2 weeks from now, just reminding your brain that it's going to be there later helps so much so that they're like, yeah, I'd actually would rather eat a little bit of this ice cream or have a couple Oreos and then I can have more later, like instead of eating all of them and feeling uncomfortably full and beating myself up about it. Like, I don't want to do that. I just want to have a couple and move on with my day and it not be a big deal.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
but yeah, it does
absolutely.
take time. So, like, if
Takes
someone's
time.
listening, like, that sounds absolutely insane. Because when I first, like, ice cream was one of those foods for me. Like, I would literally steal my poor best friend when we lived together. I would like steal her ice cream, and then like she would go to work, and I was in grad school, so I'd like go to the grocery store and buy her ice cream and like scoop it out and put it back in the fridge and be like freezer and be like, she'll never know. And like years later, we were talking about it. Or I told her I'd made a post about. It. She's like, oh, I knew you were doing that stuff, and like bless her heart because I was like, she's like, I just didn't know what to say, and I was like, not saying anything was the thing to do because like the added shame of knowing someone knows that you're binging is so uncomfortable. So I was like, thank you for not saying anything. So if you're listening, I'm like, I used to feel that way around about a lot of foods. But
Yeah.
then eventually, like now I find ice cream in my freezer and I'm like, oh, cool. Like I
Yeah.
didn't even know this was in there. This is awesome. Like surprise. And I never thought that ever would be a thing in my life. I thought that, I would be one of those people who'd be like, I just can't keep it in my house because if
Yeah.
it's here, I'll eat all of it. And it's like, no, I know it's there and I can have it, but like I don't need to have all of it because it doesn't make me feel good to have all of it at one time.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, you'll get there. It's just gonna take
Yes.
some time. Yeah. So I wanted to, before I ask you to tell everyone where they can find you,
Yeah.
I wanted to end with two questions.
Yes.
One is, what is one piece of advice you would give to someone with ADHD? And the second one is one piece of advice for those of us who have someone in our lives with ADHD.
Ah, those are good questions. I think with someone who has ADHD, one thing I would say is working on radical acceptance for yourself, I think is one of the most empowering things with ADHD of just like really embracing and acknowledging like this is my brain just works differently.
Hmm.
And when we can
It's not
accept,
worse. It's
yeah, it's
not
not
broken.
worse. Yeah, it's not, there's nothing, it works different than other people's. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. Honestly, there can be a lot of really awesome benefits, and some of the most successful people in the world have ADHD. And they're probably successful because they see the world in a different lens from other people or are able to come up with different solutions to things. And so being able to accept it and then work with it, and find your areas of strength or what things are really help you succeed and grow in life. And you can achieve so much that way. For anyone who has someone with ADHD in their lives, I would say something kind of similar along those lines of like, try to understand, or like, if your partner or, a friend or someone struggles with some aspect of things, just trying to come from a place of wanting to understand those things can be so helpful. So like I've had friends who had not really understood ADHD, and then they would come over to my house, my apartment, which my last apartment was a studio and it had like no storage in it. So things were pretty much everywhere. I worked and lived in a little studio for like a year. It was very, very, very challenging. And so I was like, okay. When she would come, my friend would come over and be like, you need a place for your things. Like things need to go away and have a place. And I was like, no, they have a place and they're out. Because if I put them away, like my brain doesn't know they exist anymore. And then I don't know where anything is. And then I tear my whole apartment apart trying to find
one thing.
One thing. And then I look around and it looks like the Tasmanian devil came and ran through my apartment, and now I have to put all of it away. So like I think being open and listening to people and not just assuming that, your friend or your, partner or family member or coworker or whatever is just lazy or they don't care of helping them. And I think a lot of times it's how is the challenge for on people, whether it comes to eating challenges or anything else, it's figuring out the how. And so if you can listen and be open to like, hey, I forget to do this, then like, hey, how can I help you remember? Or what would be helpful for you to remember, if it's an alarm or, some sort of just like for some of my clients, it's checking in, like if they work from home and their partner works from home and they're like, I forget to eat, of like just hey, have you eaten? When was the last time you ate? Just to help cue them. They're like, oh no, I haven't had anything. Like I should probably get something to eat. So I think just, being open and listening, I think is probably one of the most helpful things versus immediately trying to like fix things for somebody or tell them they should do something of like, well, because this is a great one of like when you're talking about like struggling with planning or organizing, someone's like, well, have you tried a planner before? And it's like, do you know how many planners I have at home? Like,
yes, there's a whole pile of them. And I thought that it was maybe the color. So I got a different color.
Yeah, I thought it was just the setup of it, or I thought I needed to try a digital one. Like, yes, I've tried the planners. Thank you. Like, I think asking what might be helpful for you, or opening a conversation with them versus just jumping to straight giving someone advice of like, trust me, I've tried all the things. Do you know how long people with ADHD spend searching tips for organization or tips for planning? And they know all of them, but a lot of them just don't actually work for you. So then you're like, that looks awesome. And I would love to be able to do that, but it doesn't work for me. So now I just have to like explore and figure out what does.
Yeah, I love that. I think those are two really great pieces of advice. And for just anyone with some radical acceptance, like,
yes.
It's just a huge sigh when you
Yes.
realize there's nothing actually wrong with you or your brain.
Yeah.
Works different.
Yes.
Like, and we can work with that.
Yes.
So where can our listeners are definitely going to want to hear more from you.
Yeah.
So where can they find you? Where can they go to get more from you, Becca?
Yeah. So I'm most active on Instagram. So you can find me at ADHD.nutritionist. You can send me a DM if you want to chat with me. I do also offer a 10-week intuitive eating small group coaching program. And I have a link in my bio on Instagram if you want to set up a free 30-minute call with me and just kind of learn what my coaching program is about and see if we're a good fit to work together as well. So.
That is perfect. This is incredibly helpful for me and all of our listeners. So thank you so, so much for coming on. This was amazing. And I know our ladies are going to love it.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.